the Pula has been devalued. What exactly should we make of this this adjustment? What exactly does it mean?
Okay, so there's a concept in economics that we call purchasing power parity. So ideally, it's just to say the purchasing power of the money that you have should be equal to whether you're in Botswana, South Africa, the UK, or wherever. If I put it in just layman's terms as an example, you walk in a store, you want to buy a can of Coke, you already know it's like 8 Pula or something of the sort. So similarly, if you're in South Africa and you have rents in your pocket, they should give you the same value of what you're buying. If you're in the UK, the same amount of pounds that you have, they should be having the same value. So ideally, the whole commotion and the whole interest around this is just to say, what is the relevance and the power of the money that you have in your pocket? Does it still give you the same value, and does it give you the same sort of ideal what you're trying to achieve? So what I'm seeing here, what the Bank of Botswana is doing, or the Ministry of Finance is doing, is they're trying to make it a bit more relatable. So I've been seeing a lot of comments around it saying the Pula is now being depreciated, the Pula is currently being devalued, so to say. I wouldn't use such words. I'd rather say we're being more accommodative and I'm trying to be more strategic in terms of saying we are perfectly pricing our commodities and ensuring that the Pula in our pockets, or the Pula as a pocket as a country, is more accommodative because of the way we do our exports in terms of our beef, our diamonds, our tourism, etc. So it just needs to be a bit more accommodative in terms of what we're trying to purchase. Yeah.
And I think I'm glad that you're actually bringing that aspect to the fore, because a lot of the conversations were driven from, as an individual, I usually buy goods from South Africa, and because the Pula is a little heavier than the rand, I get more than what I'm saying. So now that you're looking at it from a holistic perspective, I can appreciate that, and I hope that we can actually dissect it going through our conversation. Now, how does this concept of a crawling band exchange rate then help Botswana maintain economic stability as well as competitiveness more than anything?
Okay. So I want us to appreciate that a crawling band exchange rate is not a new regime to Botswana. We've been using it for quite some time. And I think you remember the horrors that we used to live in 2022. Everybody was crying about fuel. Everybody was crying about the cost of living, whether it's food. A lot of commodities that we're trying to purchase were really quite dearer and they're quite expensive for a lot of people to actually maintain and go by. And I think in the last third quarter of 2024, we thought inflation sitting at around 1.7%, which is in actually the lower band of what you call our short to medium term rate that we're expecting going forward. So in my own ideal is, it's a way of time to say we're trying to control inflation. We're trying to make sure that our commodities are, remember, inflation on its own, it's really a price, sort of index, sort of say, on saying, are we able to properly accommodate such what? Are we able to properly accommodate, commodity ABC, whether it's food, whether it's fuel, whatever food basket that you want to think about. So by using such a regime, you're trying to make some sort of control pleasure in place. You're trying to control the way in which consumers are not able to just irrationally purchase anything and everything. I love the example that you gave earlier on saying, usually as Botswana, we buy most of our goods from South Africa. So you also don't want to have an instance whereby we have too much money and the Pula is much stronger, so everybody's now flocking into South Africa and just buying so many things because there is an inflation trigger.
Right.
So in this world, trying to say, let us try to manage these from a holistic perspective and not just on an individual basis. So I really love this new concept. It gives us a bit of more flexibility. It gives us a bit of more market confidence, because now a lot of investors even from outside can actually start now relying on Botswana's currency regime as it is. So we are heading in the right direction, in my opinion.
Right. And just from the clip that we just played earlier before the interview, as well as just from the general holistic announcement that was made, we're told that the basket weighs from 45% for the South African rand and 55% for the SDR, to an equal of 50% split in this regard. What are the implications then of shifting the Pula's currency basket in this regard?
My opinion is it's not really a major change so far, but I want us to appreciate that South Africa, among most other countries, has been our major trading partners. But I also want us to be mindful of the mere fact that we actually import more from South Africa than we do import. And most of our trading is we export diamonds mostly, and they don't necessarily go to South Africa. Most of it, the market goes into the US, into China, etc. So we're trying to have a balance in between that, such that you don't end up having what you call a currency run. We've seen this in countries like Argentina, Mexico, and Southeast Asia, whereby traders usually try to attack a currency, for lack of a better word to use. So we don't end up in such a situation such that our currency doesn't have the right value in which it can be able to purchase the goods from outside, and also people buying inside Botswana as well could also have the very same leverage. This is me circling back to the concept that I mentioned in terms of purchasing power parity. So we need to try to strike that balance. Also, we are already heading into what you call a diversification spectrum, whereby now the special drawing rights that I've talked about, they offer some sort of what you call a protection, because you don't want to then rely in too much and saying, well, because South Africa is our major trading partners, we're trying to have a conservative approach there. So by having this balance between the other major currencies, we're able to easily trade. I think a more realistic approach of it would be the way in which banks, sort of tend to interact. A lot of times, if Bank A wants to then interact with Bank B, they usually have to then rely back on Bank of Botswana to say, give us an exchange rate, we need to then trade 1, 2, 3, etc. But now the way in which we are moving is we're trying to leave what you call an open market, such that the way in which, for example, you trade on the stock exchange, a similar example, I can buy shares in company A, person buys shares in company B. It's an open market type of thing. So we need to be heading that sort of direction, and that's where most emerging economies and more G7 economies are heading towards. Yeah.
And you spoke about how this phenomenon would also position Botswana in that when products or services from Botswana are put in the same pedestal as as products from other countries, our products should compete in that regard and look more attractive.
Yes.
What are we solving anything by doing this? Should we not then be focusing on ensuring that the quality of our goods is at a certain level versus now speaking to the currency to fix that? Or am I maybe wayward in thinking that way?
You're not wrong entirely. I'll give you an example of the diamond phenomenon that we're currently in. So Botswana's diamonds are one of the most prestigious among the world.
Right.
I think we're the second largest consumer just after Russia. And fortunately, had it not been that Russia went through a war, Botswana wouldn't actually be where it is today in terms of our export values.
Sure.
Right? So, but now, unfortunately, we're moving into this era whereby we now have these synthetic, lab-grown diamonds that are currently coming across. Sure. And this whole mining now is sort of being a bit more phased out. Look at the way Botswana's economy is currently performing. We're at a position whereby we're actually only selling out maybe 2 billion, but we're actually spending 8 billion, and we're living in so much of a deficit because our diamonds are just not selling. So I think it's the idealistic that value is in the beholder mostly. So if you, as rightly don't say, I want to buy this for this amount of money, it doesn't give it that, that credibility, that weight, that prestige that it deserves. So maybe a more pragmatic approach around it needs to be, adopted, and start saying, let us try to balance out, either the value in which we're selling these commodities instead of maybe how to price them. So maybe we can try to find a balance around this, and this is probably one of the first steps that we're taking towards that.
We've spoken about majority of the benefits that come with this adjustment, but maybe let's also look at some of the risks that we can actually foresee, if you will, or think of.
Yes.
Regarding the increase of the trading margin, the Pula's trading margin from 0.125% to now 0.5%.
A lot of times when you talk about risks that are involved, you don't want to sound a bit more negative.
Sure.
Because I think the ministry is kind of a bit optimistic at this point. In the Bank of Botswana, they're very optimistic because we're trying to drive Botswana from an old regime in which we used to do things, and we're trying to compete on an international scale far better than our peers, as a typical example. But also, I want you to appreciate that Botswana is a relatively small economy, right? Especially against our most senior trading partner being South Africa. South Africa is a very, very, very big economy, right? And a lot of times you don't want to say, fine, how many participants do we have in the market as a typical example? Do we really are we really at a point whereby us, with the few banks that we have, with the few asset managers that we have, with the few pensioners that we have, do we really have the capacity to be competing at such a scale? If we do change the overall regime, outlook, can we really participate at that level, and are we really able to take it up? Because failure to take it up would mean our market would then remain volatile. Sure. And the minute we run volatile, it means we're going to have wider margins. We're going to end up having, exchange rate fluctuations. Next thing you're seeing the Pula trading against the rand at 1.2, next tomorrow it's at 1.4 and so forth. So it causes a lot of disruptions. So to the regular individual person, this is not really a big deal. But imagine to a company, for example, that is trading and importing from South Africa, it is, hedging as a typical example. Imagine your pension as an example that have investments in shares within South African companies or other international companies, it really puts that at a peak whereby you don't want to be uncertain, especially when it comes about to public funds as a typical example. Think about our government investment account. It is sitting on foreign exchange reserves of different currencies. So the minute they fluctuate too much, that is going to be a loss or an entire risk that the country cannot really afford. So this is one of the things that you need to be a bit more mindful around. So we need to then have it in a more controlled environment such that we're able to easily fluctuate these against other economic shocks that may come about, and we need to be a bit more pragmatic around it.
Yeah. And we've had a very stable currency for a very long time, right? Can we expect that this could actually potentially shake the things as we have known them to be?
So in finance, we usually like to talk about people who are risk adverse and people who are just very risk optimistic.
Sure.
Just because you're going to sit down and just lean back and say we've been sitting well for this current amount of years, we should continue doing the same thing, then where really are you taking the country? Do you need to have a more optimistic mind rather?
Sure.
I think that is why Botswana has come into what you call this triple P, public-private partnerships, whereby you can actually have people from industry, economists, finance experts, investment analysts who can actually be able to then help the government in terms of facilitation and implementation of public funds as a typical example, and in international competition, whereby we can actually do a bit more in terms of where we are as a country. I think Botswana should stop this ideology of just being conservative and start being a bit more optimistic.
Right.
And this is one of the ways in which we can go about doing that. Obviously, it won't happen overnight. Obviously, the benefits that we're expecting to reap would not happen overnight, and we need to then give the government grace in terms of where they would like to take the country. Yeah.
Is that risk the only one that you can think of right now? Is that the only one that we can actually expect to happen after this announcement was made?
I think the benefits, like I say, would not be immediate, right? So maybe perhaps let's give it a bit of grace in terms of a timeline and actually see how things get to unfold, because a lot of people are quite optimistic, right? And some of us that work within asset management, as a typical example, we are very optimistic and trying to see exactly how far we can push ourselves. Yeah.
Right. So why is it important then to address structural factors as well as policy implementation constraints, in addition to the exchange rate policy, especially in achieving international competitiveness for Botswana, particularly seeing that we are under a new government now, or a new administration, and the direction now is we are trying to get Botswana to an economic level where we didn't find it.
Okay, so it's very ideal that we address a lot of things from the core structure, so to say. I had the pleasure of attending what you call the Youth Budget Bistro that was held by His Honor the Vice President not too long back, just just last year. And one of the things that we really mentioned is Botswana needs to start thinking from a mindset of a G7 economy, right? Stop thinking of ourselves as being so small and so irrelevant, but remember the fact that Botswana is actually so, we have so much merit that we can actually bring across in so many different sectors. And I think for now, because most of our focus has been around beef, diamonds, and tourism, we need to find a way in which we can properly capacitate and get to reap the most out of this. So really, it's more about economic diversification, and it's really more about the production growth. I think about the expansion in terms of infrastructure, the expansion in terms of technology, education, health services, and these are most of the key issues that are very, very fundamental to actually bringing Botswana from being this middle-class economy to being a high-end economy. And it's really more about policy coordination, in my opinion, and hence the need to strike in this exchange rate policy reform, if I may rather call it that, along with other structural factors that we need to then blend in. Remember that Botswana is growing, so to say, but we are not without our own challenges. So we need to find a way in which we can then say, how then do we bring in the different number of policies and structures that the government currently has in terms of accommodating them together? Where is our current budget deficit? Where are we really going wrong? Our trade balance, our balance of payments, and all these other economic factors, how then do we then blend them in together such that the physical and monetary policies get to communicate with each other, and we're able to actually bring in more for the country while also affording the people the liberty of having a conducive life, and having to ensure that the cost of living, as a typical example, is more accommodative, and Rati doesn't get to cry and sulk about so many different things that the government could be failing on, and actually provide a bit more of support to the ordinary Motswana, which is what one person that I always try to advocate for by all means.
And I'm glad that you actually brought that, because I'd like us to close our conversation from that perspective and just maybe look at it from the perspective of a layman, especially if we're looking to get into the SMME development, the entrepreneurial development in this country. Where are the low-hanging fruits there? Where do we as SMMEs, as young people in Botswana, where do we plug ourselves on to ensure that we also leverage off of this this announcement that was made?
So it'll be two things that come at the top of my head, right? There's one concept I like to call piggybacking, right? One of the new trade agreements that has been on the top and the hot topic, called the AfCFTA, right, have been speaking around, trade reforms and, sort of some of our SACU receipts, the way in which we're doing business within our SACU participants, as a typical example. And we need to capitalize and say, how many underdogs, if I may rather call them that, and how many people within the informal sector to try to benefit. And one of those things has come through in terms of tourism, in terms of facilitation of SME services, in terms of transportation, etc. But it comes in a way in which we need to then strike our balance and saying, for example, if we're going to do, bans within certain areas, if we're going to be doing, different policy implementations, does it really accommodate then that person at the low end of the food chain, if I may rather call it that. Right. So maybe perhaps let's try to strike a balance and then appreciate that a number of these things would also then come and trickle into them maybe at a later stage, and let's see how things unfold maybe in that direction. But I'm very optimistic. A lot of us will get to benefit out of the way in which the current government is trying to do things a bit more different, in terms of a more pragmatic approach, in terms of more optimistic approach, if I may rather call it that. So I am optimistic as well myself.
Absolutely. And I think you're doing the Lord's work, because some of us who are not very conversant in these economic issues, or who don't have the training in economics don't quite understand these issues. Let me take this time to just thank you so much for joining me this morning and breaking it down, so that we comprehend what this really means, and also we position ourselves in ways that we can also benefit from different phases of the economy.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And we were joined there by the Capital Media economist, Rekilo Ketlafetse, dissecting Botswana's, reviewing, if you will, of the exchange policy framework against the different trading partners. I'm sure you got a thing or two from that, their conversation. We leave it here.